We all have that friend who blames the game for their late nights, but we know the truth, it's just too good to stop. They grab you with tight mechanics, endless replayability, or just that one more try pull that's impossible to resist. There are plenty of games built to keep that cycle going. So today, I'm breaking down some of the best games that I found seriously difficult to put down. Let's get started. So starting off at number 15, it's Hades 2. And, I had a lot to live up to here because I played the first Hades, and that game is one of the best roguelikes I've ever played. So when I got into the sequel, my expectations were pretty high. Thankfully, it actually met them, and I mean, it even surpassed them. The biggest reason is that same addictive loop is still here. You jump into a run, pick up different boons, mix abilities together, unlock upgrades, get absolutely wrecked, and then somehow you're already thinking about the next run before you've even finished dying. Malinoe also feels different from Zagreus because her abilities give you more ways to control groups of enemies, and the Arcana system adds another layer of planning before you even leave base camp. What I really love is that failure never feels like wasted time. You're still unlocking things, learning enemy patterns, improving your build, or finding some ridiculous combination that suddenly works. And then you start thinking, okay, that build almost worked, let me try it one more time. That's Hades 2. One more run turns into 5 really, really fast. Coming in at number 14 is Saros, and this one immediately reminded me of Returnal, which makes sense because it's coming from Housemarque. I played Returnal too, so before Saros even came out, I already expected the combat to be good, and yeah, it is. The dodging, shooting, parrying, and constant movement all have that same Housemarque intensity, where standing still for too long usually means you're about to regret it. But what I really like is that Saros isn't just trying to be Returnal again. Argent has his own story, the world of Carcosa has its own setup, and the progression system is built around permanent upgrades that survive your failures. So you can die, go back to the passage, improve your character, and take another shot with better tools and a better understanding of the enemies. That gives the whole thing a different rhythm. Returnal could feel brutally unforgiving, while Saros gives you more reasons to keep pushing forward after a bad run, and that's where the addiction kicks in. You aren't just hoping for a lucky run. You're getting better, getting stronger, and gradually figuring the whole thing out. One failed attempt suddenly feels like preparation for the next. Now at number 13, Beast of Reincarnation is one of those games where the combat grabbed me almost immediately. I've always been a sucker for this kind of action, especially after spending so much time with Sekiro and that really satisfying parry-focused style. So when I started seeing that same kind of rhythm here, I was already interested. Emma fights with a sword while Ku, her canine companion, can jump in with different attacks and techniques, and that creates this really cool back and forth during encounters. You're not just mashing attacks, you're watching enemies, looking for openings, timing your defenses, and trying to control the fight. I mean, that's the stuff I love. The post-apocalyptic Japan setting helps too, because you're moving through these blighted environments while dealing with some seriously weird creatures. Now, there are still some rough edges. The developers have acknowledged issues with things like pacing and technical problems, so I'm not going to pretend it's perfect. But as of right now, I think the combat is already one of the big reasons to play it. And honestly, if the upcoming Phantom Blade Zero ends up delivering on its combat promise too, that's going to be a pretty fun comparison. For now though, Beast of Reincarnation is an easy recommendation if you love good parries. And number 12 is Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, and yeah, this one is personal for me because the original Black Flag is still one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games. There's just something about being able to leave a port, jump onto your ship, sail across the Caribbean, spot an enemy vessel, fight it, board it, and then immediately go back to exploring. That loop was ridiculously easy to get lost in. The remake keeps that basic freedom while rebuilding the game instead of simply giving us a prettier version. The sword combat has been redesigned around parries, the naval systems have been rebuilt, and the Caribbean itself has been reworked. So, you're getting that familiar pirate adventure with a much more modern gameplay foundation. And if you never played the original, this is probably one of the easiest ways to experience why people still talk about Black Flag all these years later. What makes it addictive isn't one giant mechanic. It's the constant little detours. You're sailing somewhere, then something catches your attention, then you're boarding a ship, then you're upgrading something, and suddenly an hour disappeared. Basically, Black Flag already understood how to make piracy feel like a vacation. Resynced just gives that fantasy a new coat of paint and a rebuilt engine. Now next on the list at number 11 is Halo Campaign Evolved. Seeing Master Chief running natively on a PlayStation console after it released last month is still wild to wrap your head around. If you are a PlayStation purist who never owned an Xbox, this is easily your best shot to finally experience the legendary campaign that shaped modern shooters. Rebuilding everything in Unreal Engine 5 gives the ancient Ring world incredible visual scale, while smoothing out the classic floaty movement to feel snappy and responsive. The core sandbox combat against the Covenant AI holds up brilliantly, especially when you are jumping in with 4-player online co-op. Now, the community was pretty upset that the studio stripped out the competitive multiplayer to focus strictly on the story mode, which is definitely a shame. But as a pure co-op shooter campaign, the loop of popping elite shields and sticking grunts with plasma grenades never gets old. You will sit down for one level and end up finishing the whole fight. Moving on to number 10. Octopath Traveler II is the kind of RPG that can quietly eat an entire evening before you even realize it. I mean, the turn-based combat looks traditional at first, but the break and boost system gives almost every fight something to think about. You're learning enemy weaknesses, building up boost points, breaking defenses, and then deciding exactly when to unload your strongest attacks. That's already satisfying, but then you have 8 characters, job combinations, and a day and night system that changes what you can do around the world. So you start experimenting. Maybe a different job fixes your party. Maybe a nighttime path action opens something new. Maybe that boss finally clicks after one small change. You know how that goes. One small discovery turns into another hour of messing with your setup. And the great thing is, Octopath Traveler 2 doesn't need some giant action sequence every 10 minutes to keep you playing. It gets you with that steady feeling of, okay, let me optimize this party a little more. Let me check one more town. Let me try this boss again. It's very old school in that way. You sit down thinking you'll play for a bit, and then suddenly you're way deeper into the game than you planned. Moving along to number 9 is Clair Obscur Expedition 33. This game came out over a year ago, and its premise alone is fascinating. Basically, every single year, a giant entity called the Paintress wakes up and paints a number across the sky, instantly turning everyone of that exact age into dust. You lead a squad called Expedition 33 on a desperate mission to destroy her before she paints their number next. What hooks you is how the combat works. It looks turn-based on the surface, but you are actively dodging, jumping, and parrying incoming attacks in real time. Nailing a perfect deflection rewards you with massive counter damage and incredible animations, so the rhythm feels way closer to an action game like Sekiro than a standard menu-driven RPG. Plus, the pacing is super tight, wrapping up in about 35 hours without dragging you through endless filler quests. Once you master that defensive timing, every single battle feels electric, and putting the controller down becomes nearly impossible. Now next, over at number 8, we've got Invincible Versus, and this one scratches a completely different kind of addiction. It's a 3 versus 3 tag fighter, so the fun comes from building a team, switching characters, extending attacks, and figuring out how to turn one opening into a huge sequence. You know, fighting games can be dangerous for this list because that one more match mentality is real. You lose, you blame your matchup, then you play again. You win, and suddenly you want another round because now you've got momentum. That's basically the entire trap here. The roster pulls heavily from the Invincible universe, and the game also has a story mode with original cinematics plus training, arcade, versus, and competitive modes. But for me, the tag system is the interesting part. You're not simply learning one character and calling it a day. You're figuring out how 3 characters work together, when to bring somebody in, and how to keep pressure going. New characters have also started joining the game after launch, so there's another reason to keep checking back. And like any good fighting game, the more you play, the more little things you start noticing. Suddenly, a basic match turns into a whole evening because you just had to figure out that one combo. And number 7 is Blue Prince. This one came out over a year ago, and it's honestly one of the most unique games on this list. It's described as a genre-defying mix of mystery, strategy, and puzzles. You're exploring a mansion that changes layout every time you enter a new room. You have to manage resources, solve spatial puzzles, and uncover the secrets of the estate. The game doesn't tell you much, like you just figure it out as you go, and that sense of discovery is what makes it so addictive. Every room you open feels like a gamble, and the tension builds as you run out of keys or stamina. The art style is clean and minimalist, and the atmosphere is thick with unease. It's not a horror game per se, but it's unsettling in a way that keeps you on edge. I remember staying up way later than I should because I kept thinking, just one more room, maybe I'll find the next clue. And then I'd lose track of time entirely. It's a game that rewards patience and observation, and it's perfect for those who like to think rather than reflex. If you're tired of shooters and action games, Blue Prince is a refreshing change of pace. Coming in at number 6 is Balatro, and this is actually my go-to game when I'm heading home from work. That's also why I have to be careful with it, because this thing is ridiculously addictive. I remember one night, I had work the next day, I checked the clock, and somehow it was already 4 a.m. I still made it to work, so we're good. But yeah, that's the kind of game we're dealing with here. Balatro takes poker hands and turns them into a roguelike where the real fun comes from building completely broken combinations. You collect jokers that change the rules, modify scoring, give you extra money, or interact with cards in all kinds of weird ways. And then you start stacking those effects together. Suddenly a hand that would have looked ordinary becomes some ridiculous scoring machine. The best part is how quickly your strategy can change. One joker can completely change your plan, and then you start hunting for another piece to make the combination even better. So you lose a run, think about what you could have done differently, and start another. Basically, Balatro turns experimentation into a habit. One run becomes another, and then you look at the clock and realize you've lost half your night. And coming in next, we have Doom: The Dark Ages. This is the prequel to Doom 2016 and Eternal, and it came out over a year ago. It's a bit different from Eternal, like you're a tank this time, not a hyper-mobile speed demon. The combat is slower but heavier, with a focus on shield bashing and heavy melee attacks. You still have that same chaotic energy, but it's more deliberate. Personally, I love Eternal, but sometimes I also want some chaos in a bit slower version, and this delivers exactly that. You're fighting demons in a medieval fantasy setting, complete with big castles and siege weapons. The new mechanics, like the shield that can be thrown like a boomerang, add freshness. The level design is more open and encourages exploration. The soundtrack is still that pounding industrial metal that gets your blood pumping. It's not as fast as Eternal, so it's more approachable for people who found that game too frantic. But it's still brutally difficult on higher settings. I found myself retrying encounters just to perfect my flow. It's one of those games where you die, and instead of getting frustrated, you just want to go again and do better. That's the mark of a great shooter. Moving on to number 4, we have Hollow Knight Silksong. The first Hollow Knight is one of my favorite Metroidvanias of all time. It's a masterpiece. And this sequel, it finally came out nearly a year ago, after years of waiting. It's no longer about the knight, which is a bit sad, but in return, we get this amazing game about Hornet. Hornet was one of the bosses in the original, and now she's the protagonist. And her moveset is way faster and more agile. You can dash, grapple, and throw needles, and the combat feels more dynamic. The world is huge, with intricate level design and tons of secrets. The music is hauntingly beautiful, and the challenge is brutal but fair. I love the faster action with her, like it's more acrobatic and lets you zip around the environment like a ninja. The story is about Hornet's own journey, and it adds a lot of lore to the universe. It took me about 30 hours to finish, and I still missed a bunch of stuff. The boss fights are memorable, especially the later ones that require precise timing. If you liked the first, this is more of that excellence, and if you never played Hollow Knight, you should start with the original, but Silksong stands on its own too. It's easily one of the best games of the last few years. Now at number 3, Kingdom Come Deliverance II is addictive for a completely different reason. This isn't a game that constantly throws flashy rewards at you. Instead, it gets you invested in the world and then lets one little activity spiral into another. You're playing as Henry in a grounded medieval setting, and you can fight, sneak, ride horses, use a bow, work with blacksmithing, build skills, manage equipment, and deal with people based on your reputation and choices. The combat also takes patience because you're working with directional attacks and positioning rather than simply swinging through enemies. And once that starts clicking, you really start feeling the improvement. A fight that would have scared you earlier suddenly becomes manageable because you understand your equipment and how the combat works. Then you head into town for one thing, and somehow spend the next hour doing 3 completely different activities. That's the trap. The game makes ordinary medieval life surprisingly interesting. It's slower than most modern RPGs, and yeah, that can occasionally frustrate me, but the same slower pace is also why it can be so immersive. You don't feel like you're rushing through a checklist. You're just living in this world, and before you know it, another evening has disappeared. And number 2 is Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, and, some games are addictive because they're relaxing. This one is addictive because it refuses to let you feel comfortable. The combat is incredibly fast, enemies hit hard, and you're constantly switching between attacks, movement, weapons, and defensive options just to stay alive. You've got multiple weapons with different ways of handling groups, plus the classic dismemberment system that makes every fight look and feel brutal. The thing I really like is that improvement is so easy to feel. Maybe you get through an encounter without taking a hit. Maybe you figure out how to use a weapon you barely touched before. Maybe you finally stop panicking when a bunch of enemies surround you. Those little improvements matter, because the game is basically asking you to get better, instead of simply giving you a stronger character and solving the problem for you. There are also 3 extra playable characters, and a hero playstyle for people who want some assistance, so there's a little flexibility here. But once you get locked into Ryu's movement and start feeling the rhythm of the combat, it's hard to stop. You beat one encounter cleanly, and then you immediately want to see if you can do the next one even better. That's the addiction. And finally, at number 1, we have the first Berserker, Khazan, and this might be the easiest game on this list for me to explain because I'm a sucker for parry-based combat. I've played a lot of Sekiro, so when a Souls-like gives me a good parry system, I already know I'm in trouble. Khazan has that same kind of feeling where the goal isn't simply to survive a boss. You're trying to understand it. Learn the attacks, recognize the timing, find the opening, and then punish it properly. The game is linear too, which I actually appreciate here because it keeps the focus on the combat rather than throwing a giant open world in front of you. You've got 3 main weapon styles, a resettable skill tree, and customizable gear, so there's still room to experiment. And then you hit the bosses. Some of these fights will absolutely beat you up and make you question your life choices, but when everything finally clicks, it's such a satisfying feeling. That moment when a boss that destroyed you for an hour suddenly looks predictable, that's Khazan. That's the hook. One more attempt becomes 10 because you know you're getting closer. And when you finally win, you immediately feel like doing it again. But that's all for this list. So, which of these PS5 games has actually stolen the most hours from you, and which one would you add to the list? Leave us a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's a great time to do it. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.